back in 2019, I spent 21 days over the course of 3 months documenting a family in El Paso that survived the Walmart shooting. It was a family of three: Luis, his wife Marcela, and their daughter Emily. Luis is a U.S. Uh, uh, he's a war veteran. I think he served in the army, and he ran a girls. He was a coach for his daughter's soccer team, and he was at the Walmart the day that a gunman opened fire, and he was shot 5 times. His father was killed, and his wife and daughter were both present because they were taking part in this fundraiser. So it was a moment of unspeakable, unimaginable cruelty, and the family let us in to document their recovery process, and none of us knew how the story was going to unfold, or what our role and our documentation would even look like. But once Luis was lucid enough to speak with us and spend time with us, we met up with him, and that was about 3 weeks after the shooting, and we met him in his hospital room while he was still, just barely taking his first steps after the shooting. And in these kinds of environments, building a relationship and establishing a rapport while also, being transparent and being honest about what our role is really important. So I didn't take any pictures for a while when we were there. We just kind of talked to them, got to know them a little bit, and told them what we were hoping to achieve. And what I said to Luis and Marcela in the hospital room was that this story belongs to them. This is their story. It's not our story. We have the opportunity to share their story for the world to see, but at the end of the day, it is their story. They own their story, and it is our privilege to be able to share it. And so within that, I wanted to set boundaries, and I wanted to empower them to say when something was enough, if we to let us know if we ever crossed any boundaries, and to feel comfortable telling us that they're not comfortable with us being present. And so I've been in enough situations where a photographer present, and especially the sound of a shutter in a difficult moment, can feel like it's compounding the trauma, that I wanted to let Luis know basically why I wanted to be there for those difficult moments. And I told him that it was important for me to be able, I wanted to prepare him to hear the shutter in the moments where he was suffering, when he was in pain, when he and his family were going through an agonizing moment. I wanted him to be prepared to hear that shutter, because I feel like we needed to be able to see the dark moments so that we could appreciate the brighter ones that we knew would come. And so that was kind of the equation that I laid out. And Luis and Marcela and Emily were game, as was the rest of the El Paso community. And so we started working slowly, and I worked intentionally. Sometimes I would only take, a few pictures in a day. I mean, a few could be like hundreds with the digital camera. But relative to the amount that I might take on a regular assignment, it wasn't very many. And we were constantly checking in. Manny Fernandez and Manny, who was a reporter, I spent more time with Luis than Manny did, just because of the nature of photography. It requires being present for extended periods of time. But what was really interesting is that and I think I learned this more on this story than at any point prior. It's really impossible for a photographer and these kinds of situations to truly disappear. There's no such thing as that fly on the wall, the photographer who's unfeeling and just this kind of observer. I just don't think that that's realistic or fair in these kinds of situations, because you're asking someone to be incredibly vulnerable, to be seen while they're incredibly vulnerable. And that is a huge ask. And for someone like Luis and Marcella, they couldn't ignore us. They didn't want to ignore us. And so the entire time that we were together was kind of one big dialogue. We talked about ourselves, we talked about our families, our fears, we talked about politics. There was nothing that was off limits or out of bounds. And we were just connecting human to human. And so, you know, in this kind of story, I realized that I was reminded that when you introduce an instrument of measurement, you're invariably going to alter the situation, the environment. And that doesn't matter if you're using a microscope or a camera. It's going to be different with you there than if you weren't there. And so the goal then becomes to minimize the impact and influence that our presence as journalists has on the situation. And the way that I think we achieved that with this story was by being so frank, being honest, and being present, because the family then, I believe, felt more comfortable being vulnerable and being seen. And so last night when we were having that conversation on Clubhouse, somebody asked, you know, something to the effect of you know, he was trying to, his sort of perspective was that photojournalism was this kind of hands-off that photojournalism was produced in kind of a hands-off sort of way. And he was likening it to caregiving, because caregiving is a very hands-on action. When you care for somebody, you're very present. And oftentimes that even requires touch, especially when it comes to, you know, to fields of medicine and so on. And I actually said that, you know, actually, I think that photojournalism there is caregiving in photojournalism, because of how much, how present photographers need to be in order to be able to capture these tender moments. And in the back of my mind, the last thing I wanted to do was compound the trauma that they were already experiencing. And there was never a moment where we were asked to leave a room, or where we were asked not to do something or see something. Every week I'd be checking in with Luis, and there was only one time when he said, you know what, we just, you know, could you come next week instead of this week? Like, we're having a really hard time. And of course, you know, that was totally fine. But there was never a moment where I think Manny and I were constantly gauging if we were crossing any boundaries. And I don't believe that we did. And I'm really proud of the way that that we went about it. And it was also really validating. And I think that, you know, another one of the takeaways that I took from this story was learning when to not take a picture. And that's one of the ways that we maintained those boundaries in a healthy way. There were moments that I felt I had captured that really spoke to the degree of suffering that their family was experiencing. And then there were other moments that I felt like, because I had already captured those, that I didn't have to capture. Where I could just let those moments be, and I could just even though I was there, I could let the family experience that for themselves without having that additional layer and possibly an interruption. So I let a lot of moments go, and sometimes I would join in on the moments, whether it's with a hug or with tears or with dialogue. You know, to make these kinds of stories that are so deeply human, I think requires a great deal of empathy and compassion, and the family's well-being and their respect, I think, comes before the quality of the images. So, you know, ultimately finding that balance, understanding when to take a picture and when not to take a picture, and letting, you know, kind of the families to a degree and one's own feelings decide when it's right and when it's not right, I think is in my mind, the kind of the ethical way to go about it. And most importantly, what makes me feel comfortable and the way that I feel comfortable working. And I'm, you know, what made me so happy at the end of the story is when it published, all I cared about was that Emily and Marcella and Luis felt like we had shared their story in a way that they felt was true and fair.